Give people the right tools and they will design and build the most extraordinary things. That quote was a focusing inspiration in bringing a team together to create Gorilla. When I studied experimental psychology, I had to code all my tasks in MATLAB, which was painful, and then collect data face-to-face in the lab, which was really, really slow. And I was envious of all of those, my fellow students at the time who were using questionnaire tools like Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey to collect their data quickly at scale. It seemed like a much easier process. They could put their questionnaire together in a day and collect their data in a day. And I wanted that. Now, I didn't have it when I was doing experimental psychology, but I've created it for you. So that was the big idea. So that cognitive and behavioral scientists could also benefit from the increased speed, scale, and reach of online participant pools and go on and do the important job of changing the world. So we have a world that's kind for humans based on evidence, not just opinion. And to a large extent, we've succeeded. With Gorilla, we've made scientists' lives easier. Let's take a look at this case study. So before Gorilla, it took Jade 2 months to build a task with MATLAB. That's a classic stop signal, an adaptive stop signal delay task, which is quite complicated. In case you're not familiar with the stop signal delay task, it's one of those ones where you're shown a stimulus and you either have to respond or you have to inhibit your response, and it moves very, very quickly. So all that reaction timing is really important. And an adaptive one means as you get better, as you perform, the inhibition into stimuli interval gets shorter, so you're having to respond and inhibit faster, and that's how that one works. And then she had to test people on this task, so it took her 6 weeks to collect data from humans face-to-face in the lab. All in all, that piece of research took her 98 days. When she switched to Gorilla, she could build her adaptive, and she did. She's a really good scientist. She likes to run her applications. She built her adaptive stop signal delay task in Gorilla, and it took her 1 day to build it. By then, she was quite a pro with Gorilla, so she wasn't learning it as well, but that's still pretty impressive, something going from 2 months to 1 day. And then in terms of testing her participants, rather than it taking 6 weeks to test 50 participants, she could collect that data in a day, well, in about an hour. She could have collected data from 500 participants in an hour. So that's a big change too. So for Jade, she'd characterize her switch from before Gorilla to after Gorilla as a saving of, I think she said 96 days of money and time and salary and all sorts of other things, and which what that allowed her to do is to, one, finish her PhD, but she also got really involved with the Open Science Network and promoting other ideas in meta science. So what we like to think is that we save you time, we make your lives easier, and we allow you to deploy that time on things that you find really interesting and satisfying and useful. I should probably introduce myself a little bit. Suzanne already said I'm the CEO of Gorilla Experiment Builder, and I also host the Behavioral Experiments online conference. Today, what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about online research generally, and then also what Gorilla is and the types of things it can do for you and how it's different to other solutions you might have come across. I imagine this is the start of a conversation, not the end of the conversation, so I'm very happy to continue after this individually if useful. So let's have a look at online research. Over the last 10 years, the possibilities online have expanded tremendously. Let's take a look at what's been happening. You can see rising popularity. These are citations for a popular recruitment service. Before 2015, very few people were taking behavioral studies online. The browsers weren't quite powerful enough. They became sufficiently powerful in about 2016. And you've seen this really quick increase of taking research online. The pandemic, of course, pushed a lot of people online because they had to, particularly over in Europe and the US. I know you had a better time over in Australia. But what we haven't seen is we haven't seen this disappear. Once people have taken their research online, they stay there. But why? And it's because of some of these benefits I alluded to with the Jade case study. There are lots of benefits to online research. There's the speed. We heard earlier, I switched to Gorilla and I saved 3 months of time and frustration. There's the scale. We all know that it's tricky to find effect sizes when you can only get to 50 participants in your lab. When you can reach 500 participants in a lunch break, 1,000 participants in a day, it opens research possibilities that otherwise just wouldn't be there. And there's also this element of reach, and I'll talk about this a bit differently, but it's particularly interesting to those of you who look at very specific populations. It's really hard to get a lot of people with, say, depression or Parkinson's disease or ADHD to come into your lab for testing. It's much easier to reach into their homes and say, safe from the comfort of your own home, you can take part in my study. And that means that you can reach people more easily and that you can collect data from those populations more easily and answer questions that would be impossible in the lab. So to characterize that, the benefits of online research are great science in less time. The other thing that's happened is there have been expanding possibilities with online research. Since about 2003, there have been surveys. I think Qualtrics was one of the market leaders. Within Gorilla, we have a survey tool which has feature parity with Qualtrics, task builder tool which has feature parity with something like Inquisit or ePrime, a game builder tool which allows you to gamify these reaction time tasks so that you can add animations and animations and particle effects to make them engaging and more rewarding. And as you no doubt know, the quality of your participant attention is what determines the quality of your participant data. And so games can be particularly useful if you're working with children and you're struggling to keep their attention on your task. We have a shop builder for the consumer psychologists. You may not have many in your department. We have a multiplayer tool for people who want to look at studies in a social context. And I'll show you a little bit more of those later. And then there's also a code editor, so you can do anything at all. But all of these tools are no-code tools. You don't need to write a single line of code. They are more sophisticated, but at the same level of complexity as using a survey tool. You just need to click on the right buttons. I rather like this quote from Rachel Theodore: "If you can dream it, Gorilla can build it." And there are advanced capabilities too. There are things that people wouldn't have believed were possible online. That in fact are, you can do eye tracking, and we even have a virtual chin rest so that you can keep somebody's face in the same place, the same distance from the screen. We have mouse tracking and another tool called Mouse View, which I'll show you in a moment. We can do audio stimuli, so playing back audio stimuli, but also audio recording if you want to capture the voice of your participants. We can do webcam recording, so you can get videos from your participants. This has been used for people doing sign language studies. You can do drawing tasks. You can do trail making tasks. I quite like this quote from Ben: "I'm astonished by the range of possibilities." Let's have a quick look at some of the things that people have done in Gorilla. So what we think about with Gorilla is its detailed behavioral metrics, no matter the task. We support traditional reaction time studies where you can have any type of stimulus and any response, and you get accuracy and reaction time measures. And I imagine that's what most of you would want to use Gorilla for. We can, as I said, do eye tracking or mouse tracking, but this is another one. It's called Mouse View, which is eye tracking without the eyes. It's been used really usefully to look at aversive stimuli. You can do drawing tasks, which can be useful for capture creativity and more nuanced thought processes, or going around a map, or annotating a document, or showing where on your body you feel those emotions. We also have this no-code game builder. So these are some classic go-no-go tasks, where if you get the wrong response, the dragon appears here. And then there's multiplayer, as I said before, about studying behavior in a social context. You can have 2 to 8 players. There is text chat. There's also video chat built into it. There's so much we know about human cognition in an isolated context, and yet so much of our behavior is social. This is our shop builder, where you can upload any products, any prices, any adverts, and see how people behave. It's often used by epidemiologists to look at nudging consumers towards healthier shopping behaviors. You can build social media simulations to look at the dissemination of fake news and misinformation, or how people interact with aversive content. You can look at navigation simulations, how people navigate around a physical environment, how they make choices in chaotic decision-making choices like this, who they want to speak to. And then you can use the same technique to build website simulations, test messaging, navigation flow, and do UX or cyber psychology type research. So hopefully you can see from that the possibilities really are endless in online behavioral research, and it allows you to go far, far beyond surveys. And with these new possibilities, researchers are collecting a lot of data. We recently published a paper about 1 million participants tells us about what 1 million participants tells us about online research. And so I'll just give you the highlights here. In terms of completion rates, they vary between 84% if you're using more stringent recruitment policies, down to about 50% if you're just putting a link on social media and saying, hey, take part in my study. Still think that's quite extraordinary, actually, that if you just put a link on a website or on social media and say, hey, I'm collecting some data about this, and as long as you make your study short enough, you can get 56% of participants to complete your study without paying them anything at all. In terms of sample size, we see that most researchers who are doing their experiments online are collecting what we would characterize as medium, so over 100 participants, or large, over 500 participant study. 500 participants in a study. So 25% of all of these 1 million participants were in studies that were larger than 500 participants. And that just wouldn't have been possible in the lab. And then in terms of study length, what we found is the median study length is about, for an online study, is about 18 minutes. Tends to be longer for task-based studies, reaction time-based studies, than it is for surveys. They tend to be a bit shorter. We find that the median sample size tends to decrease with study length, which sort of isn't surprising. It looks like people are sort of keeping equal the number of trials. That's the triage people are doing in their minds. But super interesting is we're not seeing an increase in attrition the longer studies go, at least up to the 23, 38-minute line, which is where our data extends to. There's a whole paper, there's lots more data than this to dig into. This is the link over here. Feel free to take a screenshot if you like, but I wanted to give you the highlights of online research. This next section, I want to talk about some case studies, which I think will bring out some of the things that are possible in more detail. So this allows you to not just take my word for it that other people are having success with online research, but let's hear from those people taking their research online. So when you embrace online research, there are huge gains. This study from Jim Grange looks at perceptual deficits in subclinical populations with self-reported depression symptomology. So Jim Grange at Keele collected data using, I think he calls this the Quids SR scale, and then also a flanker task. So this was self-reported depression, and then he backed it up with this questionnaire. And what he found was evidence of these perceptual deficits in perceptual representations on the flanker task. They respond differently to people without depression in people with depression. Now, for him, the most extraordinary takeaway is that his data collection for all 3 experiments, each with 200 Ns, so 600 people in total, basically took a weekend. And that would not have been possible in the lab. Now, this wouldn't be the case for all sample groups if you're trying to study people who are harder to reach or who don't exist on the recruitment platforms. That might take a bit longer. But at least in Jim's case, just asking people, do you have to self-identify whether they had depression, and then using a scale to really identify him, allowed him to collect a lot of data very quickly. In this study, Kyle Jasmine investigated whether listeners compensate for auditory dimensions that they don't perceive well. So there's a category of people who they refer to as amusics, and they don't perceive pitch well. So it's hard for them to tell the difference between something like study music and study music. And so he created this auditory categorization task that measured the extent to which people rely on pitch, which I just showed you in duration, where you slow down how you speak, in making these distinctions. So you can say study music, where I'm being slower on the music, or study music. And we tend to use both pitch and prosody when we're speaking. Now, if you're amusic and you don't perceive pitch well, you have to rely on the prosody. And he did find indeed that amusics recalibrate their speech perception to pay attention to the prosody. For Kyle, the big takeaway is that this ability to test participants remotely and to reach these niche populations is critical. There are not very many amusics in the world. Some of their participants live very far away, and it wouldn't be possible to get them into the lab. This is a different type of example from Kathy Price at the Wellcome Center of Human Neuroimaging. she was looking at anomics and whether they're different from controls. Now, anomics are people who, I always struggle to remember the definition. And I don't think I can at the moment. Oh, it's sort of a subset of aphasia. Somebody in the room probably knows and can help me out here. It's very early in the morning. But there's this comprehensive aphasia test, which measures people with aphasia on these different skills, and this notion of whether people can know the word but not know the meaning, sort of where anomics are, I think, are sitting. Now, she had this huge data set with over 600 patients, all with language difficulties after stroke. And she was having difficulty interpreting the data. She'd sort of come home really, really frustrated and going, the data just doesn't make sense. And she was chatting with her husband, who's also a behavioral scientist. He was like, well, let's go back to the original paper and let's have a look at what the control condition, what the norms were from. And the norms were originally from 29 normal healthy adults, so not a very large sample, and in about 1983, I think, or thereabouts. So a little bit out of date. And he was like, why don't we just re-norm it overnight? We could get all the stimuli, turn it into a study on Gorilla, put it online, we could get 500 participants to take part, and we'd have better data to see if it makes sense. So that's what she did. She didn't quite get 500 people. She got 300 people to take it overnight in the UK. And once she had this new data on the norms, the whole data set she was looking at started to make sense, because it turned out that 29 people wasn't a big sample to begin with. And some of the variations were just that, they were errors rather than good norms. So for Kathy, the big takeaway was the ability to collect new norms at scale overnight brought clarity to a hugely valuable data set that otherwise would have been hard to get clarity from. So it might be that you need that online research for you will be useful because you've already got a data set, but you've got these follow-up questions and you don't have the norms to interpret them with. This was another study which is more applied from Juliet Usser-Smith, who works in the primary care unit at the University of Cambridge. She was studying something really, really practical, which is, can the presentation of your cancer risk information and lifestyle advice change your behavior? So as you all probably know, your risk of cancer depends on your behavior. It's not just in your genetics, whether you are overweight, exercise, drink, smoke, and how you eat, all impact your risk of cancer. And so if we can present someone their cancer risk, can we get them to engage in more healthy behaviors? So she was testing two things: is one, which type of risk advice is the most useful, because presenting risk information is really difficult. And then if you put that risk information alongside lifestyle advice, are people more likely to intend to change their behavior or change their behavior? And what they found was that personalized cancer risk information based on your personal cancer risk, having filled out a form, alongside lifestyle advice, increases risk accuracy, risk conviction, and the intention to change behavior without immediately increasing anxiety or worry, which is sort of important. We know that making people worried or anxious about their health doesn't help them actually make behavior changes. And Juliet's big takeaway was that Gorilla can do far more than we'd ever have thought possible. And then this is another one from Cambridge, from Professor Marteau. This was with our supermarket. We created this fake online supermarket. Their challenge was to investigate food purchasing in a lab experiment in a realistic environment with a large sample. Teresa Marteau's lab, they advised the government on how to change labelling in the UK to incentivize healthy food purchasing. And so they were able to run those types of experiments. They could collect a sample of about 2,000 participants in a week. They could change the labels. They could make it about fats or sugars or calories. They can propose healthier swaps based on calorie density, whichever hypotheses they wanted to look at. And then by running these nationally representative samples, they could make an approximation of what. Sorry, somebody was just asking me to use pressing some permissions there. They were able to advise the government on what kind of nudges they could put through legislation that would encourage healthier eating. This is a quote from Pascal, who's actually at NYU, also using Shop Builder. Shop Builder increases the generalizability of our results. To be honest, it's a godsend. And that's one of those things, of course, you will want, is you want to take your research from sort of blue sky theoretical down to something that could be useful and practical. And tools like Gorilla allow you to make that that change, because you can dial in your intervention and then and test out, mock up your intervention, and then scale it up and see what impact it could have in the real world. That was just a smattering of some studies. Hopefully there was something that looked interesting to you. As I said at the beginning, I do also host a conference all about online behavioral research. It's at this website, theonlineconference.com. There are about, actually, I think there are about 100 plus talks there now about motor control, auditory control, memory, clinical research, addictions, and more. If I haven't spoken about anything that's of interest to you, do go and have a look at this website. It's so much nicer to hear about online research done in your area. And hopefully that will help you envisage what benefits your research could have by taking research online. If you're already quite keen on taking research online, then here are 3 talks which I highly recommend. There's one by Jenny Rod at UCL called Ensuring Data Quality When You Can't See Your Participants, and one from Rachel Theodore, who does, Jenny does language research, Rachel does auditory research, and she's someone on ensuring great data quality online. Both of them has tremendous hints and tips for ensuring your data quality and how to make sure that you're getting the standard data that you want. Rachel, and then Casey also has one as well on similarly. This is a screenshot from her talk, just so you can see some data. So in person, she collected data from 30 people. It took a month. They were all local or running on one set of computers. With the online replication, she could collect data from 99 people. Data was collected in less than 48 hours. So 3 times the sample in a 30th of the time. They recruited through Prolific, and all the participants ran on their own computers and headphones. And this is what the data looks like. Here's the in-person data. Here's the online data. You see there's more noise, very obviously, in the online data. But look, it's very much the same pattern. And so most researchers are pleasantly surprised when they take their research online, that while it is noisier, they still very much see the same levels of data quality and the same effects that they were seeing in the lab. So my next section of this talk is all about Gorilla and what Gorilla is in a little bit more detail. So let's get there. So what is Gorilla? It's everything you need to run a study online. Although plenty of people use it in the lab as well, to be honest. So with Gorilla, you have, when you're running a study, you need your consent form, you're going to need your demographics questionnaires, you're going to need your actual tasks, whether they're surveys, tasks, games, multiplayer, shops. You're going to need randomization and counterbalancing because you're good scientists. You're going to want the hosting and data collection because you don't want to dial up your own server. Your university and government are going to need security and compliance to make sure that you're meeting all of your data laws. And you might want some open science publishing. Once your study is all set up, you'll get your participants from somewhere. And then once they've collected the data, you'll download the data and you'll analyze it as you would have before. Gorilla does everything in the middle. So you can think of it as like Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey on steroids. Participants go in and data comes out, but rather than just being limited to questionnaires, you can do all of the tasks that you'd be able to do with ePrime, or games with Inquisit, or multiplayer with O-Tree or Z-Tree, etc. Participants come in and your data comes out. So why choose Gorilla? At Gorilla, we focus on 3 things: making it really, really powerful, making it easy to use, and making it really well supported. And our average customer satisfaction score at the moment is 78%, and that is increasing over time. PIs and researchers tend to score it even higher at about 85%. So let's look into these 3 big ideas: powerful, easy to use, and supported. We make Gorilla powerful by having everything in one platform. So you can do surveys, tasks, games, shops, multiplayer. You can do anything. And that means that you're not having to cobble together different tools. And because all of our tools work in a very similar way, once you've learned to use one, you've actually learned how to use all of them. When your students have learned to use one, they've learned how to use the other one. And so this makes it much easier to do that mixed method research that we know is really important. The way we make it easy to use is that everything is in a user interface. This is really hard and slow to work with, whereas this is just much easier to learn. It's much faster to work with. It's much easier for us to support. I love this quote from Priya. I was just messing around trying to see if Gorilla could do what we needed for a project, And I ended up creating an entire demo version, complete with all the counterbalancing, ready for the real stimuli to be added later. It's so intuitive and clear. And it's fully supported by psychology graduates. This is our team. Jade has a postdoc, Johanna has a PhD, Claudia has a master's degree, Megan has an undergraduate degree, Katrina is back, she's also got a postdoc. And between them, they answer all of our support tickets. They do a phenomenal job. They also, because we get all these support tickets, they're continually making our support docs better, and we get lots of praise about our support docs. And we have regular office hour sessions where staff, students can log in and come and chat to us face to face. I quite like this quote from Muhan Lee: Gorilla have the best support team in the world. Now let's look at the tooling, what's possible in more detail, because I know that seeing is believing. So one of the things that's revolutionary in Gorilla is the experiment tree. This is the experiment tree. This is what the tools actually look like. Let me talk you through it. This would be an example of a simple experiment. All your participants start here, then they do a consent form and a demographic form, and here's our relational reasoning task. And then they all get to this finishing node. Okay, that's not rocket science. Then we want to make it a bit bigger. We've got our within subject design. We've got a second task here. This is my affect test. And this is where the modularity starts to show its value. We don't have to reauthor our consent and demographic form or our relational reasoning relational reasoning task. We just have to author the affect test. We can just add it in. This modularization is really powerful because you just need to write your consent form once, your demographic form once. I know most of you keep it the same between studies. There are set tasks that you'll use again and again, and you can create a little library for your lab where you save your most common tasks with the different stimuli sets in them so that they're really easy to reuse. Now, the magic of Gorilla comes with these two control nodes. So this is our order node, which counterbalances the order of our tasks. And this is the randomizer, which allows you to randomize participants into a control or a treatment condition. And the magic here is when we start to combine them. So this is how you'd put together your classic randomized control trial design. All your participants do the consent and demographics. We then have the affect test. This is exactly the same affect test with two stimuli sets. You might not be able to read it. It's very small. Stimuli set A and stimuli set B over here, counterbalanced in terms of order between participants. And then here's our randomizer. We're taking one group to the control and one group to a treatment condition. And these are exactly the same task with only one variable that's different, which is how feedback is given. And so putting together that randomized control trial, which I've heard from other people in Qualtrics, is really painful. And at the end, you're not sure that you've set it up correctly. In Gorilla is a 5-minute task, really easy, but also you're really clear at the end that you have set it up correctly. The other thing we hear anecdotally from research methods teachers is that they hadn't appreciated the extent to which students were confused by statistics because they were confused by the experimental design. And when they've switched to Gorilla and the experimental design is so clear because it's drawn really clearly and the students can imagine the participants flowing through it, it's much easier for them to understand which statistical tests they should apply. It's very obvious whether you're in a between or within subject experiment. And then in our experiment tree, we also have the ability to do repeats and delay loops, so you can do longitudinal studies. We've seen people do 21-day training studies with a pre and a post test so that you can look at whether you have any training gains. So that's the experiment tree. That's once you've created your questionnaires and your tasks and your shops and your games, this is how you'd stitch them all together. Let's have a look at the task builder, which I know is the bit that many of you will be really excited to use. This is the bit that is equivalent to E prime. So these are sort of the types of tasks you can build in the task builder. And you can build so many tasks in there because we have a set number of stimuli that humans can perceive on a computer. There are a set number of responses they can give. And then there is a limited amount of accuracy of feedback that the participant needs to engage with. So we think of it as we give you the Lego bricks and you build and create anything you can imagine. So this is what it looks like in a nutshell. This is what a trial might look like. It's made out of two screens. This is a fixation and this is the stimulus and response screen. This is what the editor looks like, where you edit what the participant view looks like. Here you can see I've laid out, here is the stimulus, here are the response buttons. And then there's a spreadsheet that controls the content, and this is where I upload my files. So you can see this, this image here, P10 is this here in this trial here. this column puzzle. Here you can see this says S puzzle, so that's pulling in the images from that column and displaying it here, which is why it's circled in red. So we like to think of it as this bit is like PowerPoint. You just lay out what you want on the screen where you want it. This bit is a bit like Excel, which you're familiar with. You just say what you want in terms of the trials, the content, what links together, and here is the bit, and this is where you upload your stimuli. Let's have a look at that in more detail. So I often start off from the spreadsheet. First, we're going to show all of our participants the instructions, then we'll do these trials, then we'll show them the finished screen. I want the first trial not to be randomized because I want everybody to do an easy trial first. And then these next 6 trials, I want randomized, which is why they've all got a 1 in them. And I can preview that randomization here in the tool, which leaves me feeling confident that I've randomized it correctly. If I wanted the first 3 to randomize and then the second 3 to randomize, I'd write 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2. It'd be really straightforward to do. This is where I've uploaded my stimuli. You can search for them. You can filter for different types, lots of lovely usability improvements that make life easy. This is the instruction screen. So this is what people would see first. It's made out of an image, a text zone, and a button. And then here's the main trial, which is made out of a fixation zone, and then the main stimulus. Here's the fixation zone on this screen. And then here's the main screen with our stimulus and response buttons. Here they are. And this stimulus and response buttons is made out of an image zone, and then these 4 image response buttons, which are down there. Let's have a look at that bit in more detail. So you can move things around. You have a what you see is what you get editor. You can resize things on the fly. So you're completely confident that what you're authoring on the screen is how that's going to look to your participants, which is really important when you're designing your study. If I want to add a new object, I go to add object, similar to what you do in PowerPoint. I'm going to add a text zone. It drops in the middle as it does in PowerPoint, and say which is the missing piece. This is our instruction. We're going to drag that to the top, resize it. We can change the size of the text. And our trial is set up. We can now we can see what this looks like on different monitor sizes, which is really helpful because oftentimes when your participants are taking part remotely, they are taking part on different devices with different monitor sizes. You can also author for an iPhone. The button isn't in this video, but yes, that is possible. You can then preview what that trial looks like for a participant, and then you can respond and see how Gorilla is processing the response, which is sort of like our debug pane. I'm sure you all have experience of stepping through code with the debug button. This is our equivalent of that so that you can see how you're going. And you can step through the different lines in your spreadsheet so you can see that everything is working sensibly. But when you have those difficult trials where if it's this stimulus and they're responding that way, then show them this extra bit of information. This helps debug those particular flows. Now, the magic of Gorilla is in our component system and all the different components we have. So you can add such a huge number of objects. This is the feedback object, feedback component. And that's what you do. Whenever you want something, you go, there must be a component for that. So whether it's feedback or progress bar or eye tracking or mouse tracking, you'd go add object, search for the thing you want, add it to the screen, and it should just work. And so this was us adding the feedback component. It just works. You can change the tick and the cross. It comes with the defaults of the tick and the cross, but you can change that to a smiley face and a grumpy face if you want to. Good idea if you're working with kids. Similarly, you can add a timer. So again, you do the same thing. You'd go to add object. Oh, no, you go to screen first and you'd add a time limit to the screen. So now the screen ends after 5 seconds. And then you need to add the object, which is the countdown. Here it is. Then you drag that to where you want that to be. Change the text size. And there you go. So now when we preview that trial, we'll see that countdown 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's always that easy. New functionality that you want to add, there will be a component that does it. And as I said, the possibilities are endless. There are lots of advanced capabilities: eye tracking, mouse tracking, audio stimuli recording, webcam recording, drawing tasks, trail making tasks. Now, onto the rest of the ecosystem, which I've spent most of my time on the task builder, because I know that's where you have the most interest. I do want to show you a little bit about the rest of the ecosystem as well. We have a questionnaire tool. It has feature parity with something like Qualtrics. So it has a wide range of question types, randomization, skip logic, scoring, localization. Looks very similar to the task builder. I'm not going to show it to you now because you all know what survey tools look like and what they can do. There's the game builder, which is really cool. Let me give you some, I skipped over that. So why would you want to gamify your research? So Katie is a PhD student at University of Sheffield, and this was her experience. She was going into schools, and she has children in the school coming up to saying, oh, can I do the game again? Please, can I do the game again? I want to beat my school. So that tells you all you need to know about participant engagement and how gamifying a task that would be traditionally quite boring, quite repetitive, can be made into something that a child will enjoy. And she was doing like digit spans and backward digit spans and other really boring cognitive tasks. And she had kids wanting to come and play the game again. So these are not her games, these are somebody else's games, but hopefully it will give you a sense of what's possible in Game Builder. So this is one where you tap the balloons really quickly to look at motor control. But you can see there's animations, particle effects, you can make things move, you can make things interact with the mouse. So what it's basically made out of is background images and front images, which you can drag and drop. And when you put them into locations, you can trigger particle effects and you can trigger animations. So this might be what a game would look like before Task Builder. You could build this in the Task Builder before the Game Builder. And this is what it would look like with animations and particle effects once it's built in Game Builder. You can see it's the same thing, but it's just more engaging and more fun. So the animation engine works sort of similar to what you've probably seen in PowerPoint. You just pick from a list of animations and you link them together on a timeline to create that movement. So that makes the rabbit shrink and it makes it move to a location. That makes that bit pulse. And then you can make the fox slide in and things appear. So particle effects are the dazzling eye-catching visuals. And these are all created in the authoring tool. It's highly customizable. There are just 6 numbers that you need to be able to change, and you can see what they look like on the screen. And then you attach the particle effects. Here's a smoke effect. You attach this particle effect to the object that's doing the thing, and then it will just track with the movement of the object. So here we've got I think we can spawn some smoke when the car crashes. And so if it misses that, so it does stars when it goes onto a coin, and if it hits in, you get this smoke and the spinning. So that gives you just a brief 2 minutes on the Game Builder. It's a bit more fuddly than building a task, but it's certainly within your capabilities, about as complicated as using PowerPoint, but it allows you to make really engaging tasks. And then people sometimes worry about data quality. It's like, well, when I move from this boring lab-based version to an interesting gamified version, what does the data quality look like? Well, we see the same pattern as for online research more generally. What we see is that in the lab, it's a narrower range, and online you get a wider range in terms of performance. It's a little bit noisier, but the main effects, the averages, are very consistent and very much the same. So where we think the benefits of Game Builder is increasing participant engagement in kids and adults, testing task robustness to surface features and the context, and also you can use it to isolate and investigate game mechanics if you wanted to. In terms of our multiplayer tool, let me show you a quick video here of what's possible with the multiplayer tool. And multiplayer sits on top of Task Builder 2. So once you've learned how to use Task Builder 2, you're good to go. So here we've got player 1 and player 2. You can have a chat. So you say, hello, hope I can read through lots of money. I think we've mocked up here ultimatum or dictator game. So both the players join a lobby, and then when they're ready, they can see the instructions. They can see they can see the same thing or different things. They can act at the same time or act separately. They can have collaborative tasks or competitive tasks. It's completely up to you. Drag and drop still works. Drawing task still works. So here we've got 2 participants playing Pictionary. And you could imagine mean things you could do if you wanted to infuriate people of giving them ambiguous words with different meanings. So it all runs in Task Builder 2. It looks the same as with Task Builder, but you can just control which which player can see what stimuli, which is why that's the player A and that's the player B. So that's how that bit works. We have the shop builder tool, just have a quick look at that behind the scenes. This is what it looks like. You can create aisles, you upload your own products, you upload your own prices. It's a fully interactive shop, but it comes from a spreadsheet. You can change the appearance. You can change the logos. You can add labels. You can test product messaging and see how you can nudge consumers for public good. So here we've added a little label. There's a product image, and here we've changed it. Do you see with this new little icon? We've changed the product description. So now it's a healthy and delicious lentil-based crisp alternative. We can make it vegan friendly. So those are the types of things that you can do with the shop builder tool. And this opens up lots of different possibilities for consumer psychologists and epidemiologists in particular.
Epidemiologist. What?
And you get this action by action data when somebody is going through the shop builder, so you can see exactly what they do. Why we think of it as a behavioral study. I said I'd mention very briefly Gorilla for Teaching. So UCL have been using Gorilla for Teaching for about, oh gosh, 7 years now. Previously, it was really hard to get the students to engage in doing reaction time research. A lot of students would default to doing questionnaire-based research. But since they've been using Gorilla, the students all engage in doing reaction time studies. They have a conference every year. And most of their studies have over 100 participants, which is pretty impressive. And they do their own original research. And you know, as you can imagine, first-year undergraduates, when they first design their experiments, it starts badly. They're not great at designing experiments. They make lots of mistakes. But by the time they're in their third year and they've been designing studies for 3 years, they've learned quite a lot. And so they've stopped making quite so many mistakes, and they're starting to ask really interesting scientific questions. We also have an open science repository within Gorilla. So once you've created all of your materials, what you can very easily do is you can publish them for other people to use. I like this quote from Dr. Vivian Rogers. Open materials is so powerful. I cloned 3 tasks and adapted another. So that removed half the work that I needed to do. It saved me so much time. This is what the repository looks like at the moment. You can search for what you're looking for. So here's somebody looking at cross-lingual long-term priming of cognates and interlingual homographs from language 2 to language 1. And all of her materials, all of Eva Port's materials are in this publishing repository she's done. And from her papers, she links to this repository. So anybody reading her studies can link and see the materials, can clone them, can run replications. And this is an example of an online director game that has been published by somebody as well. And you can access open materials at this link. So that takes me to the end of my talk. Sort of to summarize, we want your data quality to go up and your stress levels to go down because you're going to get so much of your time back. We want it to be really easy to do the right things. We want it easy to do mixed method research, easy to do online research, to get large samples, easy to teach students how to do mixed method research. We want to remove unnecessary burdens so you can focus on the science that you love. We don't want you to be spending your time coding when you could be instead daydreaming about the science and the theory that you're working on. We don't want you to be spending your time getting participants and worrying about whether they're going to turn up in the lab, because that's not a great use of your time. We want you to put your studies online, collect your daily data really quickly so you can daydream about your paper and your presentations and spend time on that and how you're going to disseminate your research. And we want to focus on creating empowered cognitive and behavioral scientists who can go out and change the world, because the work you do is so vitally important. So the next steps, if you're interested in Gorilla, it's open access software, so you can sign up for free. You can use all of our tools. You can build your studies. You can take it for a test run. You can contact our support desk or come to our onboarding webinars. You can come to our onboarding webinar. You can book a conversation with me if you want to know a bit more details, or you can, as Suzanne said, you can talk to Suzanne, who's quite keen on seeing if you can if there's enough interest in getting a department subscription for your university. So all of you would be able to take your research online if you wanted to. If not, then we do offer these Gorilla grants programs. So that's another thing to consider signing up for. If this looks interesting, you don't have the money, sign up for the Gorilla grants. We generally do a few grant schemes a year, and maybe you would get a subscription. So with that, I am going to hand it over for questions.